So tonight we are up in Wakefield and with Katy Merrington, and I'm very excited about tonight's talk because I absolutely adore the garden, Katy's garden, which is at the Hepworth Wakefield. It's a stunning garden, and in fact, many of you will probably remember that Katy was a guest of ours last summer when we were doing the daily madness of broadcasting, and Katy was talking about herself and her work and the garden there at the Hepworth. And so if you want to fill in a little bit more about the sort of general garden and what Katy does, then that's on YouTube. That's free to watch, so just have a look on our YouTube channel. But tonight is one of our desert island gardens, and the idea is, for those of you who've not watched this before, it's very much modelled on the Radio 4 series where people choose their favourite music, and we ask people to choose 5 gardens that are very special to them, plus an item that's very special to them and a book that's very special to them. And I was really excited to know Katy's choice, and I was sort of in a way a bit disappointed that I've already know, because but I'm so excited for you all because it's just such an amazing talk. So Katy, welcome. It's lovely to have you back. Can you hear me, Katy? Are you there?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Okay. I'm just letting people in as well, which is it seems to be needing me to let people in. Anyway, Katy, it's lovely to have you back, and I know people are going to absolutely love your choices and everything about, you know, your sort of backstory to do with each of your choices, because you've come at it from a slightly different angle, which is really lovely. So, Katy, do you want to just give a little bit of background about where you are, or do you want to do that during the talk? What do you prefer? For those of you
during the talk, yeah, because I've got a couple of pictures I could show.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. Well, well, and also just to say to people, Katy, if you want to ask a question as we go along, please do tap into the question box and I can transmit it to Katy, because it may be that it's very relevant to a garden or an image that Katy's showing. And as usual with the desert island gardens, this is sort of it's a sort of a chat. It's, you know, it's a little bit two-way. So don't feel, if you don't want to wait till the end to ask a question, you don't have to. I can easily do that. So Katy, would you like to do the screen share and let's see?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go.
That's great. So thank you very much, Annie, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak tonight. I was very excited to think about this. What would my desert island gardens be? And it's been a good exercise to think about it and ponder this question. To explain a little bit about who I am the cultural gardener at the Hepworth Wakefield. And some of you may have been to visit us. We are an art gallery in the centre of Yorkshire, in Wakefield. And we are, as an organisation, we are 10 years old this year. So it's a special birthday year, because our beautiful building opened 10 years ago in May. And it was designed by Sir David Chipperfield Architects. And it's a curious building because we sit with our toes in the water there. I like to think slightly like Venice, but maybe the only way Wakefield is like Venice.
Oh.
And at the back of the gallery, there used to be an unloved acre of lawn, and it was flat and bare and nothing. And so the gallery had a vision to make a garden, and Tom Stuart Smith's design won a competition to transform this acre of ground into a garden with real year-round interest. And the key thing was that it was going to be a home for sculpture, that it would be open 24 hours a day, because we wanted to make a garden that was for everybody. And a joyful garden, a place where it feels good and where everybody is welcome. So that was what the garden looked like last July. Oh, I don't know. It's frozen there.
There you go.
That's it. That is what it looked like about 10 days ago. The flow mist is doing its thing, and people keep asking me, what is it? They're loving that flow mist. And we have 2 new Barbara Hepworth sculptors that have joined us in the garden this year that haven't been seen together since the Festival of Britain 70 years ago.
Wow.
And just to explain, we have a collection of artwork in the gallery relating to Barbara Hepworth because she was born in Wakefield. So we have a permanent collection of some of her works, and then we also have temporary exhibitions. And at the moment, we have a big 10th birthday exhibition, which is the biggest exhibition of Hepworth's work since she died in 75. So that's on until February. So do come and see us if you're able to, because it's really a once in a lifetime chance to see all this work brought together and our beautiful garden. I don't know, it's being very slow to change. Here we go. So I thought when I was thinking about desert island gardens, I was thinking, well, what do gardens mean to me? What have they meant to me in my life? Because of course, we all enjoy gardens, whether or not you're a professional gardener. And for me, it's been a journey from enjoying gardens as a child through to it becoming my career. And I was going through some family albums this winter, and I came across this photo, and I thought, wow, it must be the only photo of me attempting to garden as a child. And what I find funny about it is that I'm getting it all wrong there. My parents, they did try to garden, but they didn't know a lot about how to do it. And so they set me a little veg patch, but you can see it's in a north-facing area in dry shade. I don't know what I'm doing with that netting, what I think I'm protecting that from, because it looks more hazardous than protective. But what I do think is quite good, I've got quite a nice outfit, quite good for gardening.
Well, actually, Katie, I was going to remark on that. You look super stylish there, as you always do in the garden now. So I was thinking you obviously started off as a super stylish gardener, even at the age of 7. That's great.
I don't know, but I do still get my trousers wet when I do the watering. I can't help that. You can see it's soaked in there. Oh. And nowadays, I would never garden in bare feet. I think steel toe boots, they have their place. And that cane alarms me without a topper. That's a hazard to health and safety.
You've been in public gardens for too long.
That's what's happened to me. The hazards, the risks.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I found that cute photo, and I thought, well, what has my journey been to become this gardener that knows a bit more about how to garden, but of course is still always learning, because the world of plants is so big that you can't learn it all. And I was thinking, well, how do you choose 5 gardens? Because there's so many amazing gardens. There's so many different gardens, and so many gardens have already been shared on these talks. And I thought, I don't want to share ones people have already shared. So I was thinking, how shall I approach it? And I thought, well, what do gardens mean to me, or what have they meant to me? And I thought I would choose 5 gardens linking to 5 themes of what I thought gardens can be. And the first thing I think is gardens should be delicious. Because some of my favorite memories in gardens, particularly as a child, have been that sense of trying things, or where you can eat fruit berries straight from the plant, and that amazing taste sensation that you can get from plants and things in the garden. And so a sense of deliciousness, I suppose, in terms of eating, but also in terms of beauty and everything that means, that you want more of it. I think a really good garden is often very magical. It often feels set apart. And Tom Stuart Smith, the wonderful garden designer who designed our garden at the Hepworth, he was talking to me about our garden, and he said, well, we want it to be a place where the world feels a good place to be, that amidst that urban city centre, it's like an oasis that feels special, and it feels hopeful and positive, and just really lovely. And gardens are living compositions. They are selected a bit like music. Different plants come together in an orchestration, and plant combinations bring together this lovely seasonal tapestry, seasonal moments, almost like choruses where it waxes and wanes with the seasons. think gardens are places to play and be creative, and they were home for that. They were home for all sorts of things. You can eat your breakfast in the garden, you can draw a picture in the garden, you can put a paddling pool in the garden, and you can play there. And I think increasingly climate change is here, it's with us, and I think gardens, they're not just a symbol, but they are a living example of how we can build a better habitat for our future. So what I've done is I've chosen one garden for each of these themes. And there's too many gardens to choose from, but I hope each one represents something of my sense of these things. So my theme one, deliciousness. And when I was a child, my favorite thing in gardens was probably to graze like a cow from whatever was edible in that space. And the gardens we had as a kid, they were a bit wild, so there was always brambles, and I would eat brambles all day long. I would search for the ripe ones, and then I would try the sour ones, and they had a different appeal. You could see how sour you could take. But these are sort of 5 of my top favorite fruits to eat straight from the plant. And I'm sure you all know, because you're keen gardeners, but the taste is so much better, isn't it, than buying a punnet of these from the supermarket when they're cold and sterile and wrapped in plastic. And it seems to me, I don't know, I see where I work, it's an urban city centre. We're surrounded by apartments and flats and houses with backyards which are concrete squares. And actually many people, particularly in the UK right now, they don't have access to a garden of their own. And it saddens me to think that some people will live their whole life and may never eat a strawberry from a plant or a cherry from a tree. And so my first garden for this theme is not one particular garden, but I just really wanted to celebrate allotments, because allotments give many people a chance to grow, a chance to eat those plants, a chance to experiment, a chance to be physical, and a chance to have their own piece of land when perhaps you will never in your life own another piece of land at all. And I studied art originally, and when I graduated, I lived in a terraced house which had a north-facing little yard. It was a square of bricks. It got covered in algae, and I didn't understand anything about planting, so I didn't know that you could have put ferns there. I just thought nothing would grow there. But my friends and my brother, they put our name down as a group for an allotment at the nearby site. And it probably took maybe 2 years, but we got a phone call one Sunday morning. They said, "You've got to come now." It was really early. I think we'd been out. We were quite tired. And I don't know if we gave the best impression, because they did say to us, "We will be watching you." And I thought, oh, okay, we've got to live up to this. But we took it on. We just had a half plot. And for me, that was the first time I'd ever really had, other than that picture you saw, the first time I really had a bit to try out gardening properly. And, you know, you have your vision, like here on the left, you've got a vision of what you could do, what you see in the book. And then you've got the reality, which is sometimes a lot of mare's tail or weeding, or you come back and you think, wow, how has that happened? That wasn't how I left it. Like the plants were small and now they're huge, and I don't know quite how I've lost control. But for me, it became a place, you know, you could go and have a snooze on an afternoon. You could just sit and look at the frogs in the pond. You could graze, like I said, the raspberries, and you meant to take them home for a pavlova or a pudding, but you realized you'd ate the lot. And then you chatted with a neighbor on the neighboring plot and you thought that was nice. And then when you got home, you realized you had raspberry all around your mouth. And so for me, it was just a wonderful space and I loved it. I was addicted to it. I went all the time. My friends pretty much stopped going, to the point where everyone would say, what's happened to your friends, Katy? But it was just that they didn't want to be there till 10 at night quite in the way I did. And I loved it. And that was what, along with other things like helping local people in their gardens, was one of the things that helped me to realize you could be a gardener and you could train professionally. What I liked about our plot where I was that different people had different particular passions. And I think it's curious with allotments that in some ways everyone's doing the same thing. They're all growing stuff, but within it they do it quite radically different. Like I was telling Annie earlier, one man had a plot where he'd burrowed underneath his shed a big, like, dugout hole. He'd made a perfect den for foxes, and he'd set it with mini cameras, and then you could go in his shed. He had a solar panel, and you could watch the fox cubs and watch his footage. And then there was an amazing project working with people who'd come to the UK as refugees. And they were a charity, and they really opened up gardening to people who maybe wouldn't know how on earth you got a space here. And that was brilliant to see. And they introduced different plants and things I'd never seen. And so within a space like this, different charities also worked. There were some people that won the show veg, they won the county show, and everyone just couldn't believe how they did it. And then there was a man up there who, he had this greenhouse, and within it, he trained a fig tree, and he trained it so meticulously because they're very vigorous, and I don't really know how. It doesn't seem a likely thing, but he trained it just to grow within the confines of a greenhouse, and it was the only thing within it. And he wanted to grow figs because it reminded him of his childhood in Iran. And it was like a work of art to me when we saw that. And I think that's what I loved about the allotment, was that it brought people together, people perhaps who might live in separate streets and houses and never talk to each other otherwise. And you could come there and you could be solitary working, but you could do it together. And there's something really positive in it.
And Katy, you were saying earlier on, because at many allotments you have the allotment police who come around, and they're pretty strict, and they'll tell you off, and they'll throw you off the allotments if you're not up to scratch. But you were saying that they actually would come around and give you all encouragement, would actually sort of write down what you could be doing better or give you encouragement.
Yeah, you can see it's always a challenge with any community-run group because it's difficult and it's volunteers running it, and you can see sometimes it spirals a bit into a tricky situation. But on this plot at the time, which was a while ago, they had a lovely committee, and because they did sometimes need to tell people, look, you need to do some gardening, otherwise someone else can use it. What they would do is they would write to everybody each year, and they would try to encourage you. So they might say, you're doing really well controlling the mare's tail, your sunflowers look beautiful, have you tried making tea with nettles and comfrey because you've got some comfrey at the end of the plot, or have you thought of bringing in some more plants or pollinators? So it was a nice way of encouraging you and telling you how you could enter the show that they'd have, and they'd say, oh, you might have good produce for this in the autumn, and that seemed to work well.
Fantastic. That's so encouraging, isn't it? That somebody'd spend the time doing that, because there's a lot of allotments there. It's a huge site.
It is, and so many places like this work on, well, they thrive on the work of a handful of people doing a lot of organising, and of course it goes without saying, in Britain there's other amazing organisations like Incredible Edible. There's people down the road here that run an allotment more like a community project, and there are so many things. But I think as a basis, as a model, a foundation, they're just such a lovely way of bringing people into gardening, and more can be done to open it up to more people. But it's so good that we've got it, and I think certainly for me it was a big step in my horticultural career, so I wanted to put that on there. Oh, and I have these lovely prints. We've been working with an artist at the gallery where I work. She's done as a print of the garden, but she said I could use 2 of her prints of the allotments because I think they capture a bit of it, like how people are quite creative with what they build there. They build structures, you come into contact with wildlife. And it's your place, isn't it? You can go at winter for you to get your Christmas sprouts, or you can ignore it for a few months. Or you can go and have a bonfire. Like, where else can you have a bonfire? Happily, not many places if you don't have a garden. And so then after that, I trained in horticulture. So that's me working on the allotment vegetable plots at RHS Harlow-Carr. For my second garden, I wanted to talk about gardens that feel really magical and set apart, where you really think, wow, the world is an amazing place to be. And I'm going to show you Tresco Abbey Garden on the Isles of Scilly in Cornwall. Some of you may have been here, but it's a bit harder to get to. So the Isles of Scilly are 30 miles off the tip of Cornwall, off of Penzance. They sit in the Atlantic Ocean. And it's an archipelago of over 100 islands, but 5 are inhabited. The biggest one is called St. Mary's, and then one in the middle is called Tresco, and it's 2 miles up by 1 mile across.
And what I was so surprised about from that photograph is those 2 freshwater lakes on the island. I had no idea that they were there on Tresco.
Yeah, they're freshwater and they're lovely habitats for, well, a lot of the migrating birds. The Isles of Scilly are also famous for bird watching, because birds get blown off course on their migrations and then they stop here for a little pause. So you can see some crazy birds.
Oh. I have to say, sorry, Katy, this image gives me kind of hunger pangs for travelling and hunger pangs for going to Cornwall and the Scillies. It's just such a beautiful place. Oh.
It's so magical. It doesn't look like the UK.
No, it's wonderful.
Beautiful. And Tresco in particular is very beautiful because whichever way you look, there are islands on every side except the north side. So you look out onto these amazing scenes. And as the tide lifts and rises, you get the sand kind of bars, and it's very, very, very beautiful. So that's where it is. And this is a taster of what the garden looks like. It was set out in 1834 by a man who'd come to the Isles of Scilly. He'd leased the island actually from the royal family. He thought, I'll take a rent on that. And he just was quite a confident guy. There were loads of people living on it in poverty, and he thought, I'll sort this place out. I think maybe he had visions to like rule a little kingdom, and he actually did sort it out. He was the first person to, I think, bring in compulsory education. And he partly wanted to educate the kids because he thought then he could get some of them off this island, because there was too many people then it could sustain. But that's another story, really. Whilst he was doing that on the weekend, he realised the island had a microclimate. And he realised if he put a shelter belt around of trees, it increased that microclimate. And at that point, people were going plant hunting, they'd brought stuff back, and he was lapping it all up, planting it and seeing what would grow. And this is what it looks like. It's terraced, it's been blasted out of granite in these really steep terraced steps. And then massive hedges carve out the space. So some of these hedges are 10 meters high. And because it's such a treacherous, steep garden, all the hedges have to be cut by hand. So it's an amazing task how they do it. It's completely incredible. It's in some ways the garden is very generous because of the mild climate. Everything self-seeds, and it has this wild kind of naturalistic feel where things pop up. And half the battle is just to weed out where you don't want things to grow. And you can see there the Abbey Arch. There was a monastery on Tresco hundreds of years ago, and the monks had a terrible time with pirates. It was quite a ruthless place. I don't think you'd have wanted to go in those days. But yeah, the ruins create a beautiful garden. And you have to garden every surface because the aeoniums grow on everything. The echiums grow out of every crevice, a lot of erigeron, and yeah, just I never really quite gardened such different surfaces before. They have amazing trees, so they have a Metrosideros robusta, which has these amazing red flowers. That's a Chilean wine palm. I think there's not many of those outside in the UK and Britain. And it's not necessarily that it's a hot place. It doesn't get especially hot in the summer. It's more that generally there's an absence of frost and snow. Although they have had some very tragic big snow and storm events that have nearly killed the entire garden. Amazing trees like Cupressus macrocarpa and big phoenix palms and agaves. And very famous for being one of the few places in Britain where you can grow the Norfolk Island pine, Araucaria heterophylla. And I often used to think the gardens sometimes looked like you'd got a 4-year-old to an inventor garden and draw a picture, and then you just brought that picture to life because you had a big block of red and then this star shape and then some spikes. and a lot of Watsonias, a lot of agapanthus, really beautiful when the agapanthus bloom, because a lot of these plants, well, most of them, 99% of course, come from all over the world, but some of them have gone wild on the Isles of Scilly, and they grow everywhere in the sand dunes and on the roof of people's houses.
And Katie, you spent a whole year there, didn't you?
Yeah, so I went there because for quite a few decades now, they've won a scholarship. So the garden has 8 gardeners every year, but every year 3 of those gardeners are just there for 1 year on a scholarship. And quietly, they've educated really many of Britain's head gardeners. Mike Nellams, the curator, Andrew Lawson, the head gardener, have both been there for a long time. And they're very brilliant teachers. They really teach you on the plants, but they also trust you in a very amazing way. They just let you get on with it. They'll let you choose what you edit out of a border. Like echiums, they'll say, well, you've got to take it out of the path because we can't have one in the path. But other than that, you choose where you take it away. So you're choosing the display for next year.
Wow.
And yeah, they give you a lot of trust, really. Like the paths are very narrow. It's very, very nervy tractor driving, because on every corner there'll be like a Roman altar or a 18th century pot, and you're watching the tractor and you think, I don't know if I can do it. They'll be like, just reverse it around that corner. Like, I'm not sure, because there's like antiquity on the very edge. But they're very trusting and very good. So yeah, I loved it there. I learned a lot.
And you were saying that you almost became sort of institutionalized, that, you know, a year on that island, you know, it was very hard to sort of, you know, cope with being on the mainland afterwards.
Yes, because on the Isles of Scilly, there's no cars. You just have bikes. Nobody has a key to their house. And if you go to the pub, you just leave your bike outside and you hope it's there when you come out. That's the only risk, is at the pub. Someone drunk might have thought, I'll just go home on the bike. Anywhere else, your bike's fine. So when you come back and you've got to cross the road, it feels like a terrible chore. But and it's a small community. So on Tresco, there's 70 people live there year round. But then because it runs as really like a high quality place for holidays, they have 90 beautiful holiday cottages. They have a lot of staff who come and look after that for the holiday season. So the population of the island goes up in the summer. But then in the winter, you can't get off the island very easily, because it's hard to believe, but those 30 miles are very treacherous in winter when the sea is rough, because it's a really difficult piece of coastline. So you have to go on a helicopter or on a plane, or then the ferry can go in the summer. But in the winter months, even the children, they can't come home from the main island, St. Mary's, even to Tresco. They can't come home on a weekday. It's too treacherous in the boat. So yeah, it's an interesting life, an amazing place to live. Really, yeah, so amazing to be there for the whole year. So then I wanted to talk about gardens as living compositions, because all gardens are really, but particularly where I work at the Hepworth with perennials, trying to build year-round interest into a garden where one thing comes up and it does its display, and then as it's going maybe into a different shift of tone and colour, another thing comes on, and creating that play is really a work of art. And so, thinking about perennials and using them as living compositions, I wanted to share with you Dove Cottage Nursery and Gardens, and that's in Halifax in Yorkshire. It's about half an hour's drive from us here in Wakefield, so it's a great place to go to if you're coming up to us. It's just there, yeah, in the centre of Yorkshire again. And it's a really beautiful nursery and garden that was created by the Rogers about 25 years ago. They started to grow perennials, and they would drive all over Europe, going to see different growers and nurserymen and planting designers and people working with plants. They would go and see Peter Rudolph a lot, and they would look at what was happening in the Netherlands and Germany. And they had this piece of land which is north facing, 3/4 of an acre. And they started to work with perennials in it, growing and selling the plants, which they then put in a little garden there. It's enclosed by a yew hedge, and it weaves down. It's quite steep, but it takes you on a meandering kind of winding route through it, and the color palette really changes. And it's really beautiful, and it really demonstrates what you can do on quite a heavy exposed site. And Kim and Stephen, they know the plants so well. And I think it always makes me feel, you know, when you go to like an amazing art shop that sells paints and papers and wools and threads, or when you go to like a hardware shop and you look at all the woods and the plumbing, I always get that feeling like, oh, you could create so many things out of this, so many, there's like a million possibilities. And I think when you have a good nursery with a garden working in this way, you get that same feeling, don't you, where you think, oh yeah, I could, what if you put those together, or what if you do that? And you come away from that where you think, oh, I wasn't going to buy anything, or I don't, you know, I shouldn't buy anything. But somehow you see something, you think that I've got to have that grass. And it was particularly special to me because when I arrived at the Hepworth Wakefield, I came halfway through the build of the garden. This was my very first day. I looked through the fence and I thought, holy moly, like how many diggers have they got? And it didn't really even look like a garden, you know. And for the first 6 months, it was just about soil. And we just checked the soil spec, and we dug pits, and we assessed whether it was correct, and we moved soil, and you almost lose sight of what you're really building. I started to feel like I was a soil man, like a soil monitor. And I remember going to Dove Cottage and just looking at the planting combinations one weekend, and it felt such a relief. I thought, no, we're building a garden and we're building this complexity of planting and detail. And this is a picture from Dove Cottage. And I thought, well, you know, it just gave me that reminder again of what we were working towards, something so complex and detailed and pretty and beautiful. And so this is just some examples of their planting. Oh, and I must say, because of the pandemic, they've not opened the little garden this year. They've closed that, but they are open at the nursery. I don't think they do mail order, but they're so friendly and they'll give you all the advice. And yes, if you're ever in the area, do go and see them because it's such a lovely spot. And then number 4, gardens as places to create. I wanted to share with you the Barbara Hepworth Museum and Sculpture Garden in St Ives, Cornwall. And some of you will have been there. It's down here in St Ives. And this is a bit confusing because Barbara Hepworth, very famous sculptor, she was born in Wakefield. So I work at the museum in Wakefield, which celebrates her artwork up in the north of England. But down in St Ives, you can go and see her actual studio where she worked and lived from the 50s until her death in St Ives, because this studio was taken on by the Tate Gallery in the 80s, and they run it as a museum of her work and her garden there. And they keep the studio almost exactly as if she's just finished carving and hung up her coat. So you can see how she worked and exactly where she worked. And Hepworth had been working in London before she came down to St Ives. It was stressful for her. It was grimy where she was living. The war had been happening, and she was really amazed when she was able to come down to St Ives, and she found Truant's studio. And she says that it was a sort of magic. She says, here was a studio, a yard and a garden where I could work in open air and space. And this is some pictures. This is what it looks like right now if you go and visit it. It looks as though she's just put down the tools and gone out. And she had a lot of houseplants. She often kept plants where she was working, and you can see some of the types of houseplants that she kept. but she also had a garden here. And at first, the garden to her was a huge resource for working. And when she took on this studio, she just got a really big commission. And so it was an outdoor space where she could literally make and work. And I think it's really special to think of gardens as a place of being creative, because certainly as children, we always play in our creative, building things in gardens. And actually, for many adults, it is a place where they would attempt to build something. Like, not many people actually build their own house, but many people build their own shed or a raised bed or a coal frame or something, don't you? And I think there's that. But then Barbara Hepworth really took it to a new level. And her studio and garden, they're in the higgledy part of St. Ives. They're surrounded by other buildings. It does feel like a back garden. And I think the thought of making some of these monumental things there in the 50s would have been very radical, because you do wonder what the local fishermen and people pottering about down to the shops really were thinking when they heard her chiseling for months. And
I have to say, Katy, her super stylish, those trousers are sensational. I mean, I'm wondering whether this was a staged photo for the photograph, or did she really carve looking quite so dapper? I mean, she just looks amazing.
Yes, she does. And I particularly wanted to show you this sculpture because she was commissioned to make 2 sculptures for the Festival of Britain. And here she is working on contrapuntal forms in 1950. And it was so big that she made it outside. But just like gardening, it was a work of extreme physical labor. And I think that's something to say with gardens. It's all very well to have a vision with art or gardens, but what it takes is graft and labor and perseverance to make it happen. And she wrote a lot of letters at this time because these sculptures were made of Irish blue limestone and they were hand carved. And actually, it was the first time she ever got assistance. She had Terry Frost, was the artist, and some other people were her assistants. But she writes letters saying how grueling it was. It was lashing down with rain for weeks when she did it. So she had to build this tent. But she liked it outside. She preferred her sculptures outside in the open air, in the changing light with the foliage. And so I think it's really like a lesson to be bold in your garden, to be courageous with what you want to do there. I mean, if she did that, you can really do anything in a garden. And what's been really nice is that for our 10th birthday at the Hepworth Wakefield, we've been able to reunite 2 of these sculptures which she made at that point. So she made 2 sculptures for the Festival of Britain, turning forms at the front and contrapuntal forms at the back. And after the Festival of Britain, they were put in different locations. Turning forms was given to a secondary school, and contrapuntal forms was given to a new town in Essex. And they stayed there ever since, which was brilliant that they stayed out in society because she liked that for her artwork. But we've been very happily able to borrow them for the period of our exhibition. So it's the first time they've been reunited in 70 years. And I think it's lovely that they've gone from one garden to another garden.
Mm.
And that's a picture of it being lifted in. It was quite nervy because they're so precious and they haven't been moved very often. So the conservators and the curators and everybody watches their journey step by step across the country.
Wow.
And then number 5, habitats for our future. I think with climate change is really upon us, you can see at the moment in the news, and just like talking with Annie today, the weather is really weird. Here we've got full sun, we haven't had proper rain for weeks. Down south, everyone's had rain. And I feel, you feel like the climate is out of kilter. And so I think gardens provide an amazing opportunity for us to care and really look and appreciate our world more. And I want to show you Naples Botanic Garden in Florida, in the US, because there they've done some very innovative things in trying to really work with the habitats and ecosystems on their doorstep, such that the garden really bleeds out into the landscape and has this amazing relationship and supporting role in its place. So I was very fortunate to go in 2017 to Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania, USA. Some of you will have been there, I'm sure. And it's an amazing, vast garden, which has almost like lots of different gardens within a garden. It has a 4-acre conservatory under glass. It has an absolutely huge meadow, which they moved a motorway to put in. It has arboretums. It has all sorts of things.
I like to say it's like Wisley meets Disney.
It really is. And within it, there's a whole everything. There's a bonsai, there's fruit. It's got, it's really amazing. And what it is amazing for is education. They invest a lot in education, in learning, and in partnerships. And so I went there, and I went on a water lily scholarship. So I spent time in these water lily pools. And behind the scenes, I used to have to squeeze the tubers in the behind the scenes house to check that they weren't rotten every day, just squeezing little things in yogurt pots, because these big Victoria plants, they are all annuals. They're all grown from a little tuber. But whilst I was there, it was devastating to see that Hurricane Irma had struck the area of the Caribbean and Florida, Puerto Rico, and devastated lives for millions of people across this area. And it was horrible to watch because some of our colleagues were from there and had family in these places, and it felt like we wanted to do something. And Longwood Gardens were really brilliant in that they put together a team from within their staff. They chose 12 of us, and they said that they would send 3 groups of 4 people, so 4 people to 3 different gardens in southern Florida to help them with some of their hurricane clear up, hurricane recovery. It was a few months after, so it was 12 weeks after. And I went with some really amazing colleagues, Tim, Seth, and Joyce. We were sent to Naples Botanic Garden, which was a really nice connection because actually it's not so well known, but Longwood has a garden. Part of their conservatory was designed by Roberto Burle-Marx, the Cascade Garden, and that's looked after by my brilliant friend Joyce. And Naples Botanic Garden actually also has a big influence of Roberto Burle-Marx because it has a Brazilian part of its collection, and it has this huge mosaic that Burle-Marx did. But yeah, Naples Botanical Garden is right down here, so it's actually closer to Cuba and the Bahamas than it is to, say, the Panhandle of Florida. And that area has amazing flora, amazing wildlife, amazing habitats and ecosystems. But of course, like much of the world, developed and pockets of it, really, really struggling. But then some pockets of hope. And Naples Botanic Garden really was one of those. It's quite big, it's 170 acres. And actually what's amazing is that it only opened 12 years ago. And they really feel that it was a garden created by the community for the community. It was pulled together by some passionate plants people in Naples who wanted to do something about, really protecting, conserving, explaining the world of plants on their doorstep. And a team of people came together to design it. And this was as when we arrived. And when the hurricane hit Naples, it took out the power. There was a massive storm surge, I think like 9 foot high. And they lost over 230, I think, trees. And we were fascinated. We went 12 weeks later, but they explained to us what they did. And it wasn't what I would think. After the hurricane had finished and they were able to safely go back, the first thing they did was look at the trees and go around and assess which ones they thought they could save. So if a tree had fallen on its side, but they thought they could save it, they prioritized those ones. And what they then did was take off every leaf and stop it from transpiring. And they didn't do this with palms, but just the trees like those you see in the picture. They then wrapped it in hessian and they sprayed it with water every day. And some of them they then took and planted in sand in a nursery until they could then bring them back. They then put them back, and they used these buttresses as a kind of support until it reroots. And in this way, they had quite successfully saved a huge number of trees, where maybe I would have thought that they wouldn't be savable. So that was incredible to see what they had achieved in the time before we even got to see them. And they had really lovely, just simple means of interpretation to show people what had happened and what they were doing. Like this little ribbon and then a sign to explain that those trees had suffered in the hurricane. One of the other things that you didn't really realize was that when you lose most of your canopy, all the plants which you had, which were shade dwellers, are now baking in full sun. And so they'd had a lot of donations, and we helped them plant some sun-loving plants in places which used to have been shady. But I think what really inspired me about Naples was that the garden had been really designed very cleverly to sit helpfully within its habitat and ecosystem. So I think over half of the garden is devoted to the native flora of Florida. And what they have done is try to use the planting to solve a really big problem. So when you have storms and heavy rainfall, pollutants get washed into the sea through the watercourses. So you'll have high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus being washed into the sea, which then causes algal blooms, it causes dead zones. And when the garden was designed, they designed it so that a lot of it acts as a big filter, so that the planting can cope with a sudden flush of high nutrient water. The plants can then take up and happily use those nutrients whilst filtering it out for the sea beyond. And so here we are planting this kind of planting. So this is called Eastern Gamagrass, and this was a rain garden designed to take water off the building very quickly in high volumes and slow it down and filter, such that by the time it gets to the beautiful mangroves, the places where the manatees are swimming, it's clean again. And I think the garden's quite beautifully designed. They have these pools that look like infinity pools, but then it becomes behind a really naturalistic piece of landscape, which is what you would expect in certain ecosystems there. And they do a lot of work with local partnerships. So they will go to a local place called Rookery Bay, which is a nature reserve, which is just really on next door. And we went and did work GPSing orchids and putting air plants back in the trees, looking at all the mangroves. Florida has an amazing number of native orchids, and the hurricanes damaged a lot of these. So by locating them, they can then protect them for the future. A lot of tillandsias, everything is hanging with other plants. You can see how a tree becomes a host for probably thousands of different things living on it. And I always quite like this because the alligators were very well organized, and they often like to bask in the sun right next to the sign, which I thought was very good of them, especially for people like us who are from far afield and didn't know where they might possibly be lurking. So that was very cute. So, oh yes, we come to the end of my gardens. Annie and Noel asked me to recommend some books, and I was thinking really on the back of that garden in Florida. Florida has such amazing wildlife, and it was just a dream for me. I've never seen so much stuff, like so many good sightings in like 1 hour. Like you'd see an alligator, then you'd see an otter, then you'd see an osprey, then we would see a manatee, and it's hard to compete with that. And I think sometimes in the UK, we don't have these big species or these big exotic things. But Dave Goulson is a lovely writer for making you appreciate like something like an earwig. An earwig has just as amazing a life as a manatee if you really study it. And by looking after the garden, looking after these little things, everything is interconnected, just like in Naples, the water affects the sea. What you put down the sink in your kitchen affects something further afield. And So that's a lovely book for talking about that. Oh, and Annie and Noah asking, what tool could I not live without? And this was a tricky one because I feel like I should recommend some rare and special tool that I depend upon. But really, I mostly just use traditional tools like hand forks, spades, forks, rakes. And although that could be another talk in itself, how to choose the right spade for a task, I was thinking, what do I really use the most? And I probably use my secateurs the most. But then I thought, no, what I really use more than even the secateurs is probably the weather forecast. I thought, how would I get by? I bet I check it. I don't know how many times I check it, but I'm certainly obsessed with the weather. I compare the Met Office with the BBC. And in Wakefield, I can say from my non-scientific observations, I think the BBC sometimes pips the Met Office in accuracy. But having worked in many a garden, I can tell you it's not the case everywhere. In some other places, other forecasts are stronger. Certainly by the coast, XC weather is strong. But I always like to see whether the weather follows what they predict. And I've been laughing because Wakefield is very dry. People don't know that about Wakefield. We don't get a lot of rain. And to the point where there's an urban myth in Wakefield right at the moment that the government are controlling the weather forecast to keep us in for COVID. Because it'll often say it's going to rain. And my colleagues will say, yeah, but it didn't rain, did it? And I'll say, no, it didn't rain. And they'll say, that's the government. And I say, it's not, that's Wakefield. The government aren't controlling the weather forecast just to make you think I won't go to the pub. I'll stay at home. But anyway, I like that they think that. So that's always quite funny.
Lovely. Oh, that's so funny.
And then just to say, do come and visit us at the Hepworth Wakefield. We're a very new garden. We're just 2 years old, but we really want it to live well on into the future and to thrive and to be a place for the community and for visitors to come on a day out and to see the sculptural nature of plants, to see how the dynamic planting is almost like an artwork in how that all connects. We are fundraising for the garden, so if you want to support us, you can have a look at our website, which is the hepworthwakefield.org. We're trying to raise £10,000, and I really want to get a pallet truck. A pallet truck, because I don't have a vehicle. It's very heavy labor, when you put out the mulch and the things, and so we're saving to get me a pallet truck. So yeah, you can support us there. But to thank Annie and Noel for having me, and to thank many people who shared photos with me, Jason Ingram, who's taken beautiful photos of our garden, Tresco Island, Mike Nellens, and Claire Curtis, and all the gardens for being such inspirations and for helping to teach me lots of good stuff. And to thank you all.
Oh, Katy, that was just delightful. If you'd like to come out of screen share, then I know we've got a few comments and questions. Yeah, so if you just, I think you might have gone. I did. Lovely. Okay, well, I can share another weather app with you because I'm a weather geek as well, and this is one that the garden photographers use. This is one that Jason Ingram put me onto, and it's YR, and it's the Norwegian Meteorological Society, and it's really accurate. So yeah. I think you'll find this one a lot of fun, Katy.
I can't believe it, Annie. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's because the photographers use it because the weather changes so much. So yeah, so enjoy that weather app. I just thought the funny thing was how water was very prevalent in your gardens and your choices. You at Longwood in those very desirable waders, and then Scilly Isles and Tresco. The Hepworth is in the middle of the River Calder. And so water was really sort of quite a common denominator, which is interesting, I thought.
Yeah, that's a nice observation. I love water. Maybe I subconsciously picked that.
Possibly. We've got lots of lovely comments. Most people just saying how much they're enjoying it, and they're smiling from ear to ear and how wonderful and refreshing. But there is a question, let me just go back to it. John Young wants to know, how much are the planting choices dictated and influenced by the sculptures? And I'm guessing he means at the Wakefield.
Well, what we have in the garden is 4 positions where we can put sculptures primarily, because to anchor such large sculptures, they have to be anchored down in the soil. So what we did is, when Tom Stuart Smith designed the garden, he designed in 4 key positions so that you could have anywhere between none and 4 sculptures easy. You could put more, but you'd have to find different ways to put them. So we have these 4 positions. And then Tom Stuart Smith chose for these bases of these positions, like a single grass species. So for 2 of the sculptures, we just have Haconochlomacra, and for 2 we have Pennisetum, because we wanted something simple that didn't really interfere too much with the sculptures. The sculpture of the Pitchfork by Sir Michael Craig Martin, that's got Haconochlor at the base, but sometimes in photos it looks like it's in amidst all the colour. But yes, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think if we change the sculptures frequently, the plants don't have time to grow, so it doesn't look very good, which is maybe what's happened at the moment. They need 6 months then to grow if you want to have sculptures in amongst actual perennials. Because of course many sculpture gardens just put sculptures on lawn and then you can turf round and it quite quickly grows. So it's something we'll keep experimenting with. Certainly Haconochlor cope well with being moved and put back. So it may be that we go towards that if we need to, a faster thing.
Yeah. And for that, I mean, I think it's interesting if people haven't seen your original talk that's on the YouTube channel. You know, you're talking about the fact that it's not an enormous garden, but you are completely open to the public. People can just wander through, and so, you know, there's a lot of interaction with your local, you know, well, not just visitors, but local people who live in Wakefield just wandering through. And you also have volunteers helping you as well, don't you?
Yeah, we have volunteers, and we're only partway through building the garden when the pandemic started, but we'd opened that part of it, and so it became a real resource for local people. And to have a garden where world-class artwork is on display and 24 hours a day, and to aim for high quality, it takes a lot of work just to keep the litter down, to keep it looking nice. And it's lovely to see how people use it and they build it into their life, and it's become people's place. Whereas it's gone from being not a place, you would never have gone there before, you would have felt unsafe in the evening, it was just a blank piece of lawn, to now people will say, oh, I come in the evening and I sit and I bring my child and they go to sleep in the pram, or, you know, and it's so nice to hear that.
Yeah. And I think for me, I mean, certainly it's the combination of 3 things that I adore, which is, you know, incredible architecture, the most beautiful art, and Barbara Hepworth is just, you know, sublime, and then horticulture, all together in a relatively small place in the middle of a river. I mean, it's hard to describe, but you do cross a bridge to get into the gallery. It's very dramatic, but it's unexpected, but it's so beautiful to have all of these things working and sort of together. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And of course, for those who've never visited, Wakefield is about 6 miles away from the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, so you can easily go to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, you know, in the morning and go to the Wakefield, have a bit of lunch at the Wakefield, and go to the Wakefield in the afternoon. So it's great for that as well, which is absolutely wonderful. So I'm just looking at if there's any more. We've just got lots of wonderful comments, Katie, which I'm going to copy for you and send to you. Oh, somebody's saying, oh, it's this Sarah down in Yo Valley. You mentioned buying bulbs for next year. Aha, can you tell us which bulbs are your favourites? How long is that list?
Yeah, well, to be honest, we put in 60,000 bulbs in the last 2 years. So I am hoping to put in less this year. Yeah, but I will have to put in more tulips. Every year we'll put in a few extra tulips to pop up the display. what am I going to put in? I did make a plan. And then I did think just this morning, you made a plan, but you need to place your order because otherwise they sell out the top varieties.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to bump up. Rem's favourite goes down a storm. You know that tulip? It's purple and white streaks, like flamey feathers. That's been very popular to the point people will just come to me and say, Katy, I got some Rem. And I think, what are you on about? What are you talking about? And I say, Rem. And they say, the tulip, the purple white tulip. And I say, Rem, yeah, that's it. And people have been buying Rem's favourite online. So I thought, I don't want him to diminish because it was getting a bit weak. So I'll get a few more Rem's favourite things like this.
And how closely do you work with Tom on choices like that? Does he give you free rein to just go and plan for the next season, or has he got his list that he's also giving to you?
He gave me he did the first plan, and then really now he just lets me get on with it. I always worry if he's coming to visit because I worry like whether it looks like I don't know. But he's quite free. He's quite freeing with the tulips, you know. We just play, have a bit of fun. I think it's always evolving, and we'll see what happens. Yeah, Tom's very generous, and we work together on it.
Yeah, yeah. And Tanya's asking, do you design all the planting schemes yourself each year? But of course, obviously, Tom's main scheme is there, and I'm guessing there might be a little bit of tweaking, or is Tom open to introductions if you say, oh, what about a bit of this, or what about a bit of that? How open is he to your suggestions?
Yeah, we have a good chat. He was up last week. We have a good chat. We say, look at this. What do you think about this? And he is open to suggestions. Yeah. We just have a chat about it. And sometimes, to be honest, we might work with what we've already got. We've got a lot of plants there. So once they bulk up, to be honest, that's when you learn if something's thriving. I'd be more likely to swap it probably for something we already have elsewhere in the garden and take some clumps and then know that it will be doing well. So it's all perennials. So stuff comes up and has its moment and goes down. And I think it'll be more about refining it and revising it and getting it sharper and better and more how we want it. Yeah, so I work with Tom. He'll come up every year. Probably the end of the summer, we'll carry my notebook round and then we make a plan, and then I work on that next year, and he comes back and sees how I've done.
That sounds fantastic, if not a little bit daunting, but so yes, in fact we've got a plan to do an event with you at the Wakefield, and we were hoping that we'd get something off the ground this year, but I think it's probably unlikely, but it's more likely to be next year. And it would be nice, I know Tom is really keen to do a day with you there for us, and also we're talking about doing a day with Liz Ackerley that's art connected too, so that's on our cards for next year, something to look forward to when life's hopefully a little bit easier. And I know you've got quite a big building development going on opposite you at the moment, haven't you? So that's sort of, yeah, that's something you've got to sort of live with at the moment. Okay, yeah. I think I'm just seeing if there are any last messages. Sounds like a fab day. It is a fab day out. Honestly, I can't recommend it highly enough for anybody to get up to Wakefield. I mean, then of course you can go across to Sheffield and you can see the amazing planting there, but you can also go to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. There's so much to see up in that part of the world, and Katy's always there with her stripy top on. You can always find Oh, so thank you so much, Katy. You put so much into that, and I love the way that you tied everything in and gave it so much thought, and they have a slightly different angle. I think one of the things about this Desert Island Gardens is that you not only discover gardens that maybe you don't know about or you haven't seen, but you're sort of discovering about the people and why they love those particular gardens, or they're so revealing, which I think is lovely. It's really wonderful. So thank you. And you've worked in some amazing places. I'm very, very jealous. I'd love to spend a year on Tresco. That would just be a dream. So yeah.
Yes,
anyway,
thank you very much, Annie.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for tuning in and enjoying Katie's lovely selection. It's lovely to see everybody. Stay safe and well, and do check out the website if you're able to do any of our up and coming live events, because there are tickets available for some of them. Even some have just got 1 or 2 left, so you know, have a little delve through and see if you can make it to one of our events. So Katie, thanks ever so much. Take care. And I'm definitely going to come up and see. I think I might just call by. I'm judging at Tatton, so I think I'm going to deviate off on my way home and just head a little bit north and come and see you and see the garden. So I can't wait.
That'll be great.
Lovely. Okay. All right then. Well, listen, thanks a lot, and cheerio everybody. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.